The morning Marta Bauer left Caldwell, Kansas, the sun was already mean. Not warm, not bright. Mean the particular flatness of August heat that comes up off the dirt road in waves and hits you from two directions at once, from the sky above and the baked earth below, like the land itself has decided to make a point about endurance. She had been awake since 3. She had packed what she owned into a suitcase that required rope to stay closed, counted $17.40 3 times on the edge of the narrow bed in Mrs. Halverson's boarding house, and walked out before anyone in the building stirred. She did not leave a note. There was no one to leave it for. The telegram was folded in her left coat pocket, worn soft at the creases from 4 days of handling. She had read it so many times the words had stopped looking like words and started looking like a door. Harvest help needed. Room and board provided. Coldwater Ridge Ranch, 4 miles east of Caldwell. No prior experience required. No questions asked. No questions asked. That was the part she kept returning to. She had found the telegram pinned to the post office board on a Tuesday while waiting for a letter that was never going to come. She took it down before anyone else could consider it. She folded it, put it in her pocket, and walked back to the boarding house to think. By Thursday, she had stopped thinking and started packing. She pulled the handcart with the suitcase loaded on top, leaning into the handle, adjusting her grip when the bad wheel pulled right. She had known about the bad wheel when she borrowed the cart from behind the livery. A bad wheel was better than carrying a suitcase 4 miles in August heat. She had made worse calculations than that. The town of Caldwell watched her go. Mrs. Crail stood on the steps of the dry goods store with a cup of coffee in one hand and an opinion in the other. She said it loud enough to carry across the empty street, loud enough that Marta, already 20 yards past, heard every word. Something about the German girl. Something about knowing when you were not wanted. Something about time. Marta heard it. She kept walking. She had been keeping walking through things like that since she was 8 years old. Since the first morning, her mother buttoned her into her Sunday dress, and the buttons pulled, and her mother sighed in that particular way. Not angry, not unkind, just tired in a way that was somehow worse than either. She had kept walking through St. Louis, through Wichita, through every town that had decided what she was before she opened her mouth. She was good at it, the walking, the not looking back. Her hands were shaking slightly when she gripped the cart handle and turned east onto the Caldwell Road. Not from fear. She had reached an arrangement with fear a long time ago. From anger. The specific kind of anger that has nowhere useful to go, that you have to carry with you until it burns off on its own, that you cannot spend and cannot put down and cannot show to anyone, because showing it only makes you the problem. She carried it east. She let the road burn it off. Walt Denny came up behind her at the 1-mile mark. She heard the wagon before she saw it, the creak of wheels, the slow plod of a single draft horse, and she moved right to let it pass. It did not pass. It slowed alongside her, matching her pace, and she looked up at the driver. Red-faced straw hat pushed back the look of a man who had been farming his whole life and had developed opinions about most everything he encountered. He looked her over. Not quickly. Deliberately, the way men looked at her when they were calculating a problem and had not yet decided whether to say it out loud. He said it out loud. Brennan posted that ad for harvest hands, he said. Cal Brennan. Yes, she said. I answered it. He was quiet a moment. Brennan's a serious man, runs a serious operation. He ain't going to have time to accommodate someone who ain't up to the work. She looked at him steadily. She had learned over many years to look at men like this steadily. Not aggressively, not pleadingly. Just steadily, the way you looked at weather, observing it, not fighting it, waiting for it to pass. I expect Mr. Brennan can make that determination himself, she said. She shifted her grip on the cart handle and kept walking. The wagon stayed alongside her for another few seconds. Then Walt Denny clicked his horse on and drove ahead without offering her a ride. She watched the back of the wagon until the road bent and took it out of sight. Her hands had stopped shaking. The anger had cooled into something else, not gone, just transformed. Sharpened into something colder and more useful, the part of her that kept score. Not out of spite, out of precision. She had learned that the people who looked at her that way were sometimes later surprised. She had learned to find a particular quiet satisfaction in being the thing that surprised them. She adjusted her grip and kept walking. Coldwater Ridge Ranch appeared around the second bend, past the 2-mile marker spreading out behind a long run of fence post and wire. Her first thought was that it was larger than she had expected. Her second thought, following immediately, was that it was struggling. She could read it the way you read a face, not in any single feature, but in the accumulation of small things. The fence line was sound, but one section near the gate had been mended recently, and not well. Different wire, different gauge, the work of someone moving fast and not caring about permanence. The yard was functional, but not tended. Nothing neglected to the point of ruin, but nothing given more attention than strictly necessary. The wheat field visible beyond the main building was tall, but uneven. The kind of uneven that meant a difficult harvest and not much margin for anything to go wrong. She filed all of it away. The gate was closed. She unlatched it herself, pulled the cart through, latched it behind her, and walked up toward the yard. Cal Brennan was standing outside the barn. He was tall, several inches over 6 feet, with the kind of build that comes from actual physical labor rather than any deliberate effort toward it. Dark hat, work-worn clothes, a face that had been weathered long enough to have stopped minding the weathering. He was holding a length of broken harness in both hands, and he was watching her come across the yard. His expression gave away nothing at all. She stopped 6 feet from him, set down the cart handle, and looked at him directly. She had learned that too, the looking directly. Some people read it as aggression. The right people read it as what it actually was, which was honesty. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "I am Marta Bauer. I answered your telegram." He looked at her. Not the slow inventory look she had gotten from Walt Denny on the road. Not the calculated assessment of a man deciding whether she was a problem. He simply looked, taking in what was in front of him without apparent judgment. Just seeing. It was unusual enough that she noticed it. "You walked from Caldwell," he said. "Yes, in this heat. The wagon that passed me did not offer," she said. Something shifted in his face, barely perceptibly. "You got experience with camp cooking, hot meals. Large crew field conditions, limited supplies. Yes, I can also manage provisions. Keep accounts if you need it. I don't need accounts. I need the harvest crew fed on time so they don't lose daylight stopping to complain about it. I can do that. What else?" She met his eyes. "Whatever needs doing that nobody else is doing. That tends to be where I end up most useful." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he dropped the broken harness over the fence rail and turned toward the main building. "Rooms off the kitchen," he said, already walking. "Small, private. Wages are room board and $2 a week through end of harvest. After that, I can't promise you anything." She picked up her suitcase and followed him. "I'm not asking you to," she said. The kitchen told her what the yard had started. A man had been managing it. She could see that in the arrangement of things, the iron pot clean and hanging in the right place, the dry goods organized. But organized the way a person organized things when they were maintaining, rather than running everything in the right position, but nothing touched with any particular confidence. The herbs on the windowsill were alive, but barely. The bread tin had crumbs in it from at least 3 days ago. Someone had been keeping this kitchen functional the way you kept a wound from getting worse without actually making it heal. She was going to change that. In the back of the top drawer, half hidden under a folded dishcloth, she found a bank envelope. Sealed. Unopened. The postmark was 10 days ago. She looked at it for a moment, the weight of it, the particular quality of official correspondence that arrives with bad news already shaped inside. She did not open it. She put the dishcloth back over it and closed the drawer. She did not need to open it to understand what kind of letter it was. A boy was sitting at the kitchen table. 10 years old, maybe 11, with dark hair and summer freckles, and the kind of face that watched everything without appearing to. He had a piece of old harness across his knees, a smaller piece than the one Cal had been holding outside, and he was working at it with a needle and thread, watching Marta with the specific alertness of a child who had learned to read rooms quickly and thoroughly. "Owen," Cal said, "this is Miss Bauer. She'll be cooking through harvest." Owen looked at her with those careful eyes. "You're the one who walked from town?" "Yes." Walt Denny said a woman answered the ad and walked the whole 4 miles and didn't stop. She glanced at Cal. He was looking at the window. "I was tired," she said to Owen. "Very tired. I just wasn't going to show it to Walt Denny." Owen considered this with great seriousness, turning it over, testing the weight of it. Then he nodded the deliberate, decisive nod of a child who has received information he finds satisfactory, and went back to his stitching. Cal showed her the room. She stood in the doorway and looked at the narrow bed, the washstand, the window with afternoon light coming through the thin curtain, and something in her chest went quiet. That particular silence, the silence of a person who has been braced for a blow that did not come. A roof, a locked door, a room that was hers until the harvest ended. "Supper's at 6, Cal said. "Roy usually handles it." "I'll handle it tonight," she said. He paused. "You walked 4 miles. "I'm aware of that," she said, and turned to face him. "Mr. Brennan, I need you to see what I can do before you make up your mind about whether hiring me was reasonable. The fastest way for that to happen is for me to cook supper tonight. So I'm going to." He looked at her, that same still-taking-in look. "Then Sellers got salt pork, dried beans, cornmeal, some onions." "That do?" "That'll do fine," she said. He left. She sat on the edge of the bed for 30 seconds. Just 30. Long enough to let her hands stop performing steadiness. Long enough to feel the full weight of the walk and the morning and Mrs. Crail on the steps of the dry goods store, and the 4 months before that, which had not been gentle months. Long enough to acknowledge all of it privately where no one was watching. Then she stood up and went to find the cellar. Roy Kessler was in the kitchen when she came back up. He was in his early 50s, lean and sun-cured in the way of men who had spent most of their lives outdoors, with the watchful stillness of someone who had been on ranches long enough to know that new people were the primary source of new problems. He looked at what she was carrying. He looked at her. He said nothing. She set her supplies on the counter and started work. He moved out of the doorway without being asked and settled into a chair to watch. The silence he gave her was the silence of a man withholding judgment, not hostile, not welcoming. Neutral. She could work with neutral. Harlan Pruitt and Clem Ward came in while the beans were cooking down. Harlan was 40, compact and deliberate in his movements, with the particular steadiness of a man who has already absorbed most of what life intended to throw at him and found a way to carry it without showing the effort. He nodded once when she introduced herself and took a chair without making anything of the situation. Clem was 19, loose-limbed and quick-eyed, with the specific confidence of someone who had not yet been wrong about enough things to have learned caution. Clem stopped when he saw her, looked at her in a way she recognized immediately and had long ago stopped finding surprising. "Huh," he said. "You're the German girl." "I am German, yes," she said. She kept stirring. "If you'd like to tell me something useful about this kitchen, I'll listen. Otherwise, sit down and stay out of my way." Harlan Pruitt made a sound somewhere between a cough and a recognition, the sound of a man who has just seen something settle into its rightful place. He pulled out a chair and sat. After a moment, Clem sat too. She cooked salt pork and onions. Cornbread beans cooked down with a little of the pork fat and a pinch of dried pepper she found on the windowsill. Simple food, the kind of meal that had been made in kitchens like this one 10,000 times before. But she cooked it the way she always cooked, when she needed to make a point without speaking with her full attention. Every element timed right. Nothing burned. Nothing under-seasoned, the cornbread set exactly where every man at the table could reach it without having to ask anyone to pass it. When she put it on the table, there was a silence. The particular silence of people tasting something made with actual care. Owen ate 2 helpings without looking up. Roy ate steadily and said nothing. She was already learning that this was his version of approval, a language she was going to have to read through absence rather than presence. Harlan said quietly, "This is good, Miss Bauer. Just that." Clem ate everything on his plate and did not say another word about Germans. Cal sat at the end of the table and ate slowly, the way a man eats when he is thinking about something else. But twice she caught him looking at her. Not at her face the way men usually looked at her face. Not at her body the way men usually looked at her body. At her hands, at the way she moved around the kitchen, at the way she had positioned the cornbread on the board before she brought it to the table. She noticed him noticing. She did not show it. After supper, she washed the dishes, swept the floor, banked the fire. When she was done, the kitchen was cleaner than it had been when she arrived. She stood for a moment with both hands wrapped around a cup of water, not drinking, just holding something solid, and she thought, a roof, a locked door, a room that is mine until the harvest ends. She had walked 4 miles for it. It was worth 4 miles. She went to bed before dark and was asleep in minutes. She was up at 4:30, before the sky had decided what color it was going to be, before the horses were restless in the barn. She built the fire, quietly put the coffee on, and started the breakfast biscuits. And she was rolling out the second batch when she looked through the kitchen window and saw something she had not expected. Cal Brennan was standing at the edge of the north wheat field, alone. In the pre-dawn dark, his hat in his hand, his head slightly bowed. The particular posture of a man who is not looking at the field, but through it a man having a private conversation with something larger than himself, something he was not ready to name in front of anyone else. She had stood like that herself, more than once. She knew what it looked like from the outside. She looked at him for one long moment, then she looked away back to the biscuits and did not look toward the window again. She was still at the stove when he came through the back door. 20 minutes later, boots, muddy hat, back on face arranged back into its usual expression of controlled competence. He stopped short at the doorway. The table was set. The coffee was poured. Owen was already in his chair blinking over a bowl of cornmeal mush. Roy Kessler was on his second cup hat on the hook, already reading the posture of the morning. Cal looked at all of it. Then he looked at her. She waited. He sat down and wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He looked out the window at the wheat field just visible now in the gray early light, pale and still and uncut, and he said, "Storm season comes early out here. Most years by late September. This year, it's tracking faster than the report said." She set down the pan she was holding. "How much time?" she said. He looked at the table. 8 days, he said, maybe less, to get that wheat cut and in the barn. She waited. "Bank holds a note on this property," he said. "Harvest pays the note." No harvest. He did not finish it. He did not have to. She had already found the envelope in the kitchen drawer. She looked at him directly. "Tell me what you need from the supply end. I'll make sure nobody loses field time to a bad meal or a missing piece of gear. Hands stay fed, they stay moving. That's what I can do." He looked at her for a long moment. The light was coming up outside the wheat field, pale and waiting. "You're sure about that?" he said. "I walked 4 miles yesterday on a bad cartwheel in August heat," she said. "I'm sure about most things." Roy set down his cup. Harlan appeared in the doorway with his hat in his hand. Clem was behind him, quieter than the night before, watching. Cal looked at the wheat. Then he pushed back his chair, stood, and reached for his hat. "Storm's 8 days out," he said. "Maybe 6. We start cutting today." At the door, he stopped. He turned back. The expression on his face was not warm and it was not cold. It was something more specific than either the face of a man who has noticed something and is not yet ready to name what he intends to do about it. "Miss Bauer, that handcart you borrowed from the livery, the wheel that was pulling." "Yes." "You fixed it." "I straightened the axle pin with a rock," she said. It held. Something moved behind his eyes, small and private. He put on his hat. "Good fix," he said. Then he walked out into the morning. Owen looked at her across the table with enormous eyes. She picked up the pan and went back to the stove, but she was smiling just slightly, just enough to be real. The first week at Coldwater Ridge taught Marta 3 things. The first was that Cal Brennan ran his operation the way a man runs something he is terrified of losing, with absolute precision and very little conversation. He was up before her most mornings. She discovered this on the 3rd day when she came downstairs at 4:15 and found the coffee already made and his boots already gone from the mat. After that, she started coming down at 4. She never caught him in the kitchen again. She was not sure whether he was waking earlier to stay ahead of her or whether he simply did not sleep much. Either way, she stopped trying to outpace him and focused instead on having everything ready before anyone else needed it. The second thing she learned was that the ranch was in worse shape than it looked from the road. Not the land. The land was good, deep-soiled and flat, the kind of Kansas ground that wanted to produce if you gave it a fighting chance. The trouble was everything surrounding the land. The equipment was old. 2 of the field hands Cal had counted on for this harvest had left in July without explanation, which was why the telegram had gone up in Caldwell in the first place. The fence on the north edge of the property needed work that no one had had time to do. And the storm, the one Cal had mentioned over coffee that first morning, was not staying where the weather reports had put it. She heard Roy and Cal talking about it outside the barn on the 4th morning, their voices low and specific in the way of men discussing a number that does not add up. "We cannot cut the north field in time," Roy said. "Not with 4 hands." "We cut the south field first," Cal said. "Best yield there. We lose the north. We lose the north. You lose the north, you're 400 bushels short of the note." Silence. "I know that," Cal said. More silence. Then Roy said something she could not quite hear, and Cal said, "We work with what we have," and his boots crunched back toward the house. She moved away from the window before he came through the door. She stood at the stove and thought about 400 bushels. She thought about it all morning. The third thing she learned that first week was Owen. Owen was not Cal's son. She had understood that from the first day Cal had said the boy's father had worked the ranch, but she had not understood the full weight of it until the 4th evening, when she was sitting on the back step shelling dried corn, and Owen came and sat beside her without asking, and picked up a handful and started working. They shelled corn together for 10 minutes without speaking. Then Owen said, "My pa died in March." She kept shelling. "I'm sorry," she said. "Horse kicked him," Owen said. "It was fast. Mr. Brennan said he didn't suffer." He paused. "But I think Mr. Brennan was just saying that, so I wouldn't feel worse." She looked at him. He was looking at the corn in his hands with that particular gravity he carried everywhere. "People do say that," she said. "Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it isn't. Either way, it's generally the only thing they know to say." Owen was quiet for a moment. "Do you think it's true?" She considered the question the way she always considered questions from children who asked them seriously, honestly, which meant not easily. "I think it doesn't change how much you miss him," she said. "So maybe it doesn't matter either way." Owen turned that over carefully. Then he nodded the same decisive nod he had given her the first night, the one that meant he was storing something in a place he could find it later. "Mr. Brennan let me stay," he said. "He didn't have to." "No," she agreed. "He didn't. He doesn't say a lot," Owen said, "but he does things." He was quiet for a moment. "He fixed my pa's saddle. Didn't say he was going to. I just found it one morning hanging in the barn all cleaned up. He never said a word about it." Marta looked out at the darkening yard and did not say anything. Owen added quietly, "He watches you too." She kept her voice level. "I expect he's making sure I'm doing the work right," maybe Owen said. He did not sound convinced. He stood, dropped the corn in the bowl, and went inside without further comment, leaving Marta alone on the step with the Kansas evening settling around her. She sat there for a while. She told herself it did not mean anything. Men watched women who were working in their kitchens. It was practical observation, nothing more. She was fairly good at lying to herself when she needed to be. On the 4th day, she noticed Harlan Pruitt's boot. She caught it at mid-afternoon, the slight favoring of his left leg, the almost imperceptible shift in his gait that spoke of something rubbing wrong. Not bad enough to slow him visibly, bad enough to cost him by end of day. She watched without commenting. She watched the way he took the boot off outside the bunkhouse that evening, sitting in the dirt, untying it with the careful attention of a man whose feet hurt. She went out with her sewing kit. "I'll take that," she said. He looked up. "Ma'am, the sole's separating at the welt," she said. "I'll stitch it tonight." Harlan looked at her for a moment with the particular weariness of a man who was not accustomed to people doing things for him without a reason attached and a cost somewhere downstream. "I don't want to trouble you," he said. "It's not trouble," she said. "You lose a sole in that field, you could lose the foot. Give me the boot." He gave her the boot. She stitched it that night by the kitchen lamp, double-stitched tight enough to last through harvest, and then some. She set it outside his bunkhouse door before she went to bed. In the morning, she watched from the kitchen window as he found it, turned it over in his hands, examined the stitching with the slow, careful attention of a man who knew good work when he saw it. He stood like that for a long moment. Then he put the boot on and walked toward the barn without a limp. He came to the kitchen door at breakfast and said quietly, so the others did not hear, "Thank you, Miss Bauer. My wife used to stitch like that." "Used to," she said. She passed, he said, 4 years ago. She nodded. She handed him his coffee. "The stitching will hold through harvest," she said. "After that, get a cobbler to look at the welt." He took the coffee and nodded, and that was all between them. But from that morning on, whenever Marta was carrying something heavy across the yard, Harlan appeared beside her and took the other end without being asked and without making anything of it. Small things. She ran on small things. She always had. On the 6th day she heard it. She was in the supply area at the north end of the barn, reorganizing grain sacks that had been stacked wrong. They were going to cause a moisture problem if the humidity rose the way the sky was suggesting. She was working quietly and efficiently, and she was not trying to listen to the conversation happening on the other side of the wall. She heard it anyway. Clem's voice not quite low enough. "I don't see how she keeps up." Woman her size. Roy's voice. Flat. "She keeps up fine. I'm just saying." A pause. Back in Dodge, they had a girl not as heavy but close working the Harvey house, and she lasted about 3 weeks before Clem. Roy said it once, like a period. Silence. Then Clem, "Lower you think Brennan's actually going to keep her on after harvest?" Roy did not answer. That silence, unlike his other silences, told her exactly what she needed to know. Marta stood in the supply area with a 50-pound grain sack in her arms and kept her breathing even. She was good at this, at hearing things and not reacting until she was somewhere private enough to react. She had had a long time to practice. She stacked the grain sack. She stacked the next one. She finished reorganizing, and she went back to the kitchen, and she stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists for 30 seconds and looked out the window at the north wheat field standing tall and uncut in the afternoon light. 8 days. You need 8 days. After that, whatever happens, happens. She dried her hands. She went back to work, but it sat with her all afternoon. Not Clem's words. She did not particularly care about Clem's words. Roy's silence when Clem asked whether Cal would keep her on. Roy had been on this ranch 6 years. Roy knew Cal Brennan better than anyone, and Roy had not said yes. She had known this, of course. Cal had told her himself on the first day. "After that, I can't promise you anything." She had not let herself think too hard about what came after. But now, the question was standing in the middle of the kitchen, and she could not step around it. What happened to Marta Bauer when the harvest ended? She had $17.20 left. She would have earned perhaps $12 to $16 more by end of harvest, depending on how many weeks it took. $30 total, give or take. Enough for a train ticket somewhere and a month of very careful living while she found the next situation. She had started over with less. She told herself that 3 times while she made supper, and by the 3rd time she almost believed it. She was at the north fence, ostensibly checking the water trough. Roy had already checked it that morning, and she knew it when she heard boots in the dry grass behind her. Cal came and stood beside her at the fence. Not close, a reasonable distance. He looked out at the north wheat field without preamble. "You heard us this morning," he said. "Roy and me." She considered lying. She decided against it. "Yes," she said. "How much?" 400 bushels short of the note, she said. "And 8 days, not 12. Cal put both hands on the top fence rail and leaned forward slightly. "The storm's tracking faster than the reports said." "How much faster?" 6 days, he said. "Maybe 5. She let that settle. 5 days. The south field might be finished in 5 days. The north field was 3 days of cutting alone, probably 4 with the equipment he had. The arithmetic did not improve no matter how many times she ran it. "What if you had another cutter?" she said. He looked at her. "I'm not asking permission," she said. "I'm telling you I can do it. I grew up doing harvest work until I was 16. My father's farm was nothing like this, but scythe work is scythe work. You put me on the east edge of the north field, and I can run a clean row, slower than your men. But another row is another row. Miss Bauer, the north field is the difference between you keeping this ranch and losing it," she said. She turned and faced him directly. "I did not walk 4 miles in August heat to watch you lose it because you were too proud to let a woman pick up a scythe." He looked at her in the fading light. His face was all shadow and angle, and for a moment she could not read him at all, could not tell if she had just made a catastrophic error, if the careful arrangement she had been building all week was about to come undone in this field at the edge of his property. He straightened up from the fence rail. "Your right hand," he said. "When you reached past me to open the cellar door, I saw your right palm." She waited. "The calluses across the base of your fingers." He said it simply as a statement of fact. Somebody who built those up knows how to use a scythe. He had known since the first day she arrived. He had said nothing. He had simply watched and waited and let her find her own way to the question. "East edge," he said. "Roy will show you the rows in the morning." He picked up his hat to go. Then he stopped. "Supper was good tonight," he said. He walked away into the early dark. She stood at the fence for a long moment and looked down at her right palm in the last of the light. The old thick calluses at the base of her fingers, built through years she mostly tried not to think about, years of early mornings and cold ground and work that had not been given to her, but taken by her own hands, one season at a time. She turned and walked back to the house. There was tomorrow's breakfast to plan, and 5 days of harvest left, and a north field that was not going to cut itself. She was not thinking about what came after. She was not thinking about train tickets or boarding houses or the sound of Mrs. Halverson's floor at the top of the stairs. She was thinking about the east edge of the north field, and about a man who had looked at her hands on the very first day and had said nothing about what he saw until she made the offer herself. She was in the north field at 6:30 the following morning. Roy had shown her the rows at first, light, efficient, minimal instruction, the kind of teaching that assumes competence and only fills in the specific gaps. He handed her the scythe and watched her take a practice swing without comment. When she straightened and looked at him, he said, "Only keep the blade low on the upswing." Then he walked back to the south field without looking back. She worked. She was slower than Cal's men. She had known she would be, and she did not waste energy being troubled by it. Slow and steady and clean, she cut clean rows, no stalk left, ragged blade low on the upswing the way Roy had told her. By 9 in the morning, she had 2 full rows done and her arms were burning from the shoulder down. She did not stop. The Kansas morning was already hot, the kind of heat that settled over the plains before most people finished their first cup of coffee. Sweat tracked down the back of her neck and soaked through the fabric between her shoulder blades. She ignored it. She had grown up in heat. She had grown up in cold, too, and in the particular misery of early spring, when the ground is neither frozen nor soft and the work is hardest, because the earth itself has not yet decided to cooperate. She had learned in those years that her body was more capable than anyone looking at it from the outside would guess. She had learned that discomfort was information, not instruction. It told you where you were. It did not tell you to stop. Owen appeared at the edge of the field at 10 o'clock with her water canteen and a piece of cornbread. He stood watching her work with that particular stillness he had when something mattered to him, the expression she had already learned to recognize as his version of deep attention. "Mr. Brennan didn't know you were going to do this," he said. "He knows now," she said, and drank the water. "Clem says it's not a woman's job." She handed back the canteen and took the cornbread. "Clem says a lot of things. Thank you for bringing this." Owen watched her eat it with the seriousness of a boy who's been entrusted with something important. "You're going to be sore tomorrow?" "Probably," she agreed. "I could bring you the liniment from the barn, the good kind. Harlan uses it for his shoulder." "That's very kind of you," she said. She meant it without qualification. He nodded and went away, and she picked up the scythe and went back to the row. By noon, she had 4 rows clear. By 3 in the afternoon, she had 6. Her hands had stopped shaking with fatigue and moved into something past it, the specific hardness that comes when a body runs out of complaints and simply continues. She was aware that Cal had ridden past the north field twice during the afternoon. She heard the horse and did not look up. She cut. She was on her 8th row when she heard boots coming through the cut wheat behind her. She knew the sound of that step, unhurried, deliberate, before he spoke. "Stop," Cal said. She kept cutting. "Miss Bauer." "1 more row." She finished the swing and straightened and turned to face him. Her arms were trembling. She did not care. That's 9 rows in 1 day. His jaw was tight. Something in him was working through something he had not expected to have to work through. "You are going to hurt yourself." "I have been hurting myself doing useful things my entire life," she said. "I prefer it to hurting myself doing nothing." She bent and picked up the water canteen. "Is supper going to make itself?" She walked past him toward the house. Behind her, she heard him exhale a long, slow breath that sounded almost like it had words in it that he decided not to say. She did not look back. That evening at the supper table, something had shifted without anyone acknowledging it. The same 4 men, the same kitchen, the same food, but some weight had redistributed itself. Some arrangement had changed. Clem passed the bread without being asked. Harlan refilled her cup before his own. Owen watched her with that serious, attentive look he kept for things he was deciding were important. Cal sat at the end of the table and ate without looking at her directly, which was she was learning its own form of attention. She cleared the dishes. She was running hot water over them when Roy appeared in the kitchen doorway with a piece of paper in his hand. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked back at it like a man making a final decision. "Brennan asked me to figure the numbers," Roy said. "If you hold today's pace and weather holds to 6 days, we cut the north field in time." She kept washing. "I know," she said. "I already figured it." A beat of silence. "Of course you did," Roy said. He set the paper on the counter beside her and went back out. She finished the dishes, dried her hands, and picked up the paper. Roy's numbers were neat and practical, the handwriting of a man who had been keeping accounts for years. At the bottom below his calculations there were 2 words in different handwriting. Larger, more deliberate. Good fix. The same 2 words Cal had said about the axle pin that first morning. She set the paper down. She stood alone in the clean kitchen with the lamp burning low and the Kansas night pressing against the window. And she let herself feel it just for a moment, just in the privacy of the empty room. The strange and unfamiliar sensation of being in a place where the things she could actually do were being seen. Not her face, not the fact of her that everyone seemed to have opinions about. Her hands, her work, what she was actually made of. She folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket. Then she banked the fire, checked the locks, and went to bed. Outside, the Kansas wind was picking up from the south. She felt the change before she heard anyone say anything about it. She was hauling water to the field edge at dawn on the 4th day of cutting buckets in both hands. and something moved against her face from a different direction than the morning before. She stopped walking. She stood with the buckets and looked south where the sky was doing something complicated at the horizon. Not storm, yet something preliminary to storm. The particular quality of light that comes before weather changes its mind about what it intends to do. She set the water down at the field edge and went back to the kitchen and thought about it while she cooked breakfast. By the time Cal came in from the yard, she had already moved all 12 grain sacks from the supply area near the barn's south wall to the higher interior shelving on the north side. 40 pounds each, carried 2 at a time because the cart was in the field. Her shoulders knew about it. She did not mention it. Cal poured his coffee and looked at the window. Wind shifted, he said. Last night sometime, she said. South-southwest. He turned and looked at her. You moved the grain. South wall would flood if we get water coming hard under the barn door, she said. The way the floor grades the interior shelf is 3 inches higher. It'll matter if the storm comes in with real weight behind it. Cal set down his cup. He walked to the barn door, opened. It looked at the interior shelf, looked at the grade of the floor, looked at the south wall. He stood there for 10 seconds. Then he came back. Roy, he said loud enough to carry to the bunkhouse. Roy appeared in the doorway, hat half on, moved the equipment off the south wall, everything, higher ground inside or up to the loft. Storm moved up again. Roy looked at the sky, then he looked at Marta, then he went to work without a word. Cal picked up his hat. We cut today until we cannot see our hands in front of our faces, he said. Every row counts. He was out the door before she had finished plating the eggs. Owen appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the empty table at the food she had plated at the open door. They're not eating, he said. Take Clem's plate out to him, she said. Harlan's too. They'll eat walking. She was already wrapping cornbread in a cloth. Go, now. Owen took the plates and went at a run. She ate standing at the counter 3 bites of egg, the heel of a bread loaf, then washed the pan, put the kitchen in order, and went to get the scythe. She was in the north field by 6:40. The wind was working against her. Not violent yet, but insistent, pushing at the wheat in irregular gusts that made the stalks lean and shift and complicated the angle of every swing. She widened her stance, adjusted her grip, and worked with the gusts instead of against them, timing each swing to the brief lulls between. It was harder. It was slower. She kept going. By 9 o'clock, she had 3 rows done instead of the 4 she had managed the morning before. She did not let herself think about the mathematics of that reduction. Clem appeared at the field edge at 9:30. She registered with genuine surprise that he was coming toward her row rather than toward the south field. He stopped a few feet away and held out a second scythe, shorter handled, older, but sharp. She could tell it was sharp by the way he was carrying it, blade angled away from his body with the careful respect of a man who knows what a sharp thing can do. Roy sharpened it this morning, Clem said. He was looking somewhere near her left shoulder, the posture of a person doing something they are not entirely comfortable explaining. Figured if we split the north field, you take east rows, I take west, we might make up the time the wind is costing us. She looked at him for a moment. Clem, she said. That is a good idea. He shrugged. It's math, ain't personal. He turned and walked toward the west edge of the field without waiting for a response. She watched him go. It was not personal. Of course it was not personal, but he had gotten up that morning and taken an extra scythe to the field and divided the work without being told to, and a week ago she would not have bet on that. She picked up her scythe and went back to her rows. By 11, the wind had picked up considerably. The sky to the south had gone a color she did not trust. Not the clear gray of ordinary overcast, but something with an undertone that the plains seemed to absorb into themselves, the way ground absorbs water before a flood. She kept her rhythm and did not think about what the tightening numbers meant. The real trouble came at 1:30. She was in the kitchen showing Owen how to fold the cornbread batter press. Not stir the pressing is what makes it hold when a sound from the south field made her hands go still. Not the rhythm of work, something sharper, the particular sound of a mechanism stopping that should not have stopped. She looked at Owen. "Hold the batter. Do not stir it." She went to the back door. Roy was crossing the yard fast, which was not something Roy did. "What happened?" she called. "Equipment." Roy said, not breaking stride. "Cutting blade snapped. Cal's looking at it." She followed him to the barn. Cal was crouched over the cutting bar from the field machine, and even from 10 feet away, she could see the break a clean snap at the joint where the blade met the housing. Metal fatigue. The kind of failure that does not announce itself until it happens all at once. Harlan was behind him. Clem had come in from the north field and was standing in the doorway. Nobody was talking. The silence in that barn was the specific silence of men calculating a disaster and not liking the numbers they were getting. "Can it be welded?" she asked. "Not out here," Cal said. He did not look up. "Nearest smithy is Caldwell. 4 hours round-trip minimum." She looked at the broken blade. She looked at the joint. She looked at the bolts on either side of the break, at the housing, at the drive mechanism, intact, all of it, intact and functional. The blade was in 2 pieces, but the housing, the mount, the drive mechanism, all of it untouched. "Move," she said. Cal looked up. "Move," she said again, and came forward and crouched where he had been crouching and put both hands on either side of the break and looked at it properly. The fracture was at the mounting joint, and the bolt was seated wrong, angled slightly off square, putting uneven stress on the metal every time the blade cycled, until the metal ran out of patience and failed all at once. The blade was ruined. Everything around it was not. "Do you have a spare blade?" she said. "Any size." Roy went to the back of the barn. He came back with a blade shorter, heavier, designed for a different cutting bar entirely. She looked at it. She looked at the housing. She pressed 2 fingers against the inside of the mount, feeling the angle. "This bolt has been seated wrong since it was installed," she said. "That is why it snapped. It was running off center the whole time. If you seat a replacement bolt correctly and shim the housing here," she pressed her fingers into the mount, "you can run the shorter blade at a reduced pass width. You lose maybe 20% of your cut width, but the mechanism runs, and the mechanism running is the difference between finishing this harvest and not." Cal was very still. "You know farm equipment." "My father's machinery broke constantly," she said. "We couldn't afford the smithy." She stood. "It will take about an hour to refit. You need a flat shim leather will work if you don't have metal, and you need to reseat that mount bolt exactly square. I can walk Roy through it, or I can do it myself." Cal stood. He looked at Roy. Roy looked at the blade and the housing and at Marta, and something in his face moved through a rapid revision. "Show me," Roy said. She showed him. 55 minutes. Roy's hands were steadier than hers for the fine work. So she directed, and he executed crouching beside him, talking him through the shim placement and the bolt angle with the patience of someone who had learned these things by failing them first. Cal stood behind them and did not speak. Harlan and Clem watched from the doorway. When the blade seated and raw, Roy engaged the drive mechanism, and it ran clean, reduced width slightly slower, but running there was a sound in the barn that was not quite a cheer and not quite a breath. Something between the two. Something that lived in the chest. 40 minutes of daylight we lost, Cal said. "Then we had better get back out there," she said. She stood and walked back to the kitchen to check on Owen's batter. She heard Cal say something behind her low to Roy. She was already through the door. She told herself she was not trying to hear it. That evening she was on the porch after supper when she heard horses on the road. Not 1, 2, moving with the deliberate pace of people who are arriving somewhere and know it. She watched from the porch without moving as the horses came through the gate. When the riders came close enough to see clearly, something in her stomach did a specific and unhelpful thing. She knew one of them not well. She had seen him twice in Caldwell, a broad-shouldered man in a good coat, the kind of coat that announced prosperity without elegance. Square face, careful eyes that were always calculating something and had gotten good enough at the calculating that it no longer showed on the surface. His name was Silas Holt. He held the mortgage note on Coldwater Ridge Ranch. She knew this because Caldwell was a small town and financial information moved through it the way water moved through flat ground, finding every low place eventually whether anyone directed it there or not. The second man was younger, well-dressed, carrying himself with the posture of someone with legal training or the desire to project it. Marta went to the kitchen door. "Owen," she said quietly, "go to your room." Owen read her face. He went without asking why. She was at the kitchen window when Cal came in from the south field and met the two men in the yard. She could not hear words clearly at this distance, but she could read posture well enough. Holt was doing most of the talking. He had papers in his hand. The younger man indicated the wheat field with one hand. Cal stood with his arms at his sides, and his weight balanced the stance of a man keeping himself very still on purpose. She went out. Not running. Walking with purpose, wiping her hands on her apron, moving like a woman who had somewhere to be and had already decided to be there. Cal heard her coming. He glanced at her, once a quick look she could not entirely read. Holt looked at her with the flat assessment of a man who categorized people quickly. He categorized her as staff and moved his attention back to Cal. "I'm simply informing you of the timeline," Holt was saying. "The note matures in 14 days. If the harvest payment is not received in full, I know the date," Cal said. "Then you understand we need to confirm your expected yield." Holt indicated the younger man. "Mr. Vane is here as an independent assessor as per paragraph 7 of your note. In the event the lender has reasonable concern about the borrower's ability to fulfill the note terms, the lender may request an independent yield assessment with 7 days' notice." Notice was sent 10 days ago. Marta looked at Cal. His expression did not change. But she saw his jaw work once, and she understood the notice had arrived, and he had not told anyone because telling anyone would have made it real in a way he was not ready for. The sealed envelope in the kitchen drawer. 10 days old. "When did the notice arrive?" she said. Holt looked at her, surprised she had spoken. "And you are? I manage harvest operations for this ranch," she said. "When did the notice arrive?" A small silence. 10 days ago, Vane said. 10 days ago, she had been on her second day at Coldwater Ridge. The equipment had still been functional. The storm had still been 8 days out. The North Field had still seemed possible. "Mr. Holt," she said, "what figure does Mr. Vane need to see in order for the bank to consider the note terms satisfactorily met?" Holt looked at her for a moment, the expression of a man deciding whether to answer a direct question from a woman in a muddy yard. He answered it. 1,400 bushels, he said. "That is the figure stipulated in the note terms." She did the arithmetic instantly. South Field at current progress approximately 800 to 850. North Field at the pace she and Clem were cutting the mechanism, now running again, the North Field was possible. Barely. If the storm held. If nothing else broke. "Mr. Vane can assess tomorrow morning," she said. "Current progress in the South Field will demonstrate a clear trajectory to 1,400 bushels, provided both fields are completed." Vane looked at her. "Both fields?" "Yes. The North Field will be significantly advanced by tomorrow morning." Holt looked at Cal. "Mr. Brennan is this woman authorized to speak on behalf of Coldwater Ridge?" The silence lasted exactly long enough to matter. "Yes," Cal said. "She is." Holt adjusted his coat. "Very well." He looked at Marta one more time, not warm, not hostile, just calculating. "I would encourage you not to make promises this ranch cannot keep Miss Bauer," she said. "And I do not make promises I cannot keep Mr. Holt. That is precisely why I made that one." Holt held her eyes for a moment. Then he put his papers away and rode out through the gate. The second horse followed. The yard went quiet. She turned. Cal was looking at her with an expression she had no ready category for. Something had come loose in his face, some carefully managed layer of it, and underneath was something much less controlled and much more human. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did," she said. He looked at her. Then he said, "Marta." It was the first time he had used her given name. It seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. "The North Field," he said. You just told them it would be significantly advanced by morning. That means we cut tonight, she said. You, me, Roy Clem Harlan. We cut until we cannot see, and we start again at 4. The moon is gibbous. There'll be enough light for 2, maybe 3 hours after dark. He stared at her. Or she said you can go inside and lose this ranch in 14 days. That is also an option. He looked at the north field. He looked at her. Then Roy. He called it toward the barn. Roy appeared in the doorway. Get the lanterns, Cal said. All of them. They cut by lantern light. It was slow work, harder on the eyes, harder on the back, harder in every way that mattered. But it was work, and Marta did it with the stubborn, non-negotiable forward motion of a woman who had already decided this was going to happen. At 9 o'clock, she came in to refill the water jugs, and Owen was in the kitchen with the lamp burning. On the table in front of him was a piece of paper covered in handwriting and small sketched rectangles. I counted the cut rows from the fence line, Owen said without looking up, and I measured the uncut section by pacing it. He looked up at her. If you finish 10 more rows tonight and start again at 4 tomorrow, you'll have 16 rows left by the time Mr. Vane comes at 9. She looked at the paper. The arithmetic was right. A 10-year-old boy had done the arithmetic right and come out at the right number. Your father taught you to count rows, she said. My father taught me everything that mattered, Owen said quietly. She stood there for a moment. Then she put her hand briefly on his shoulder, just once, just briefly, and said, Go to bed. You've already done your part. He looked at the paper. Is it going to be enough? She picked up the water jugs. It is going to have to be, she said, and went back out into the dark. They got 12 rows done. Not 10. 12. She lost track of time somewhere after the second hour and simply kept going. Swing, advance, the rhythm of it becoming something past thought, past pain, past the burning in her shoulders that had stopped being new information 3 hours ago. At 11:30, Cal appeared beside her row. Stop, he said. 2 more, Marta. His voice was different in the dark, quieter, something stripped from it that was usually there. Stop. She stopped. She straightened. Her back gave a long, specific protest. 12 rows tonight, he said. Roy counted. She waited. He was carrying a lantern, and it lit him from below, and in that light he looked tired in a way that went deeper than the day's work. Something older than working tired. How are your hands? He said. Fine, she said. They're not. He reached out and took her right hand before she could step back, held it under the lantern and looked at it. The blisters had risen along the inside of her palm, red and raw, over the old calluses, and she had been ignoring them since yesterday, because ignoring them served a purpose and mentioning them served none. His thumb moved carefully along the edge of one blister, not pressing, just tracing the boundary of it. She stopped breathing for approximately 2 seconds. There's salve in the kitchen, he said, on the shelf above the iron pot. Use it tonight before you sleep. I know where it is, she said. Her voice came out steady. He did not let go of her hand immediately. He held it for a moment longer, her right hand in both of his, in the dark, in the lantern light, with 12 cut rows behind them and 16 to go. What you did tonight, he said. He stopped, started again. What you said to Holt. She waited. Nobody has done that for this ranch before, he said. I mean that. Then he picked up his lantern and walked back toward the barn, and the light went with him, and she stood alone in the north field with her blistered hands and the Kansas night pressing down on everything. She pressed her right palm flat against the front of her apron. In the pocket beneath her hand, folded soft from handling, were 2 pieces of paper. The telegram that had brought her here, and Roy's note with 2 words in different handwriting at the bottom. She had been holding on to both of them as though they were the same kind of thing. She was beginning to think they might be. She used the salve. She sat on the edge of her bed at midnight, with the lamp turned low, and worked it carefully into her right palm. The blisters were bad. Not infected, but the kind of raw that would be serious by morning if she did not manage it. She wrapped her hand in clean cloth from her sewing kit and lay down without undressing fully because 4 o'clock was not far away and sleep was worth more than comfort. She slept. She dreamed about her mother's kitchen in Stuttgart, which she had not dreamed about in years. The smell of it, the sound of the cast iron on the stone floor, her mother's hands shaping dough before the light came up. She woke at 3:50 with that smell still in her nose and the immediate clarifying knowledge of everything that needed to happen before 9 o'clock. She was downstairs and had the fire built before 4. She was at the stove when the wind changed, not gradually. The way things change on the Kansas plains all at once, decisively like a door, thrown open by someone who has been waiting on the other side. She went to the window. The sky to the south was wrong. Not storm gray wrong, not the ordinary wrong of weather moving in. This was the specific categorical wrong of a sky that has already made up its mind, a darkness at the horizon with a greenish undertone that farmers on the plains recognized in their chests before they recognized it with their eyes. When the sky goes that color, you stop doing whatever you are doing and you move. She looked at it for 3 full seconds. Then she turned from the window and went to wake everyone up because the storm was not 8 days out or 6 days out or even the 2 days they had been counting on. The storm was today. Cal was already in the yard when she stepped outside. She had not gone to wake him. She had not needed to. He was standing at the edge of the north field in the pre-dawn dark, looking south at the same sky she had just looked at through the kitchen window. And from 30 feet away, she could read his posture the way she had learned to read it over the past 8 days, the particular set of his shoulders, the weight forward on the balls of his feet, the stillness that was not peace but calculation. He heard her boots on the porch and turned. She said it before he could. "That is not a 6-day storm." "No," he said. "It is not." They stood together for a moment, both looking south. The greenish darkness at the horizon had spread since she first saw it from the kitchen. The wind was coming in hard, irregular gusts, now the advance edge of something that had made up its mind about where it was going and was no longer interested in negotiation. "How long?" she said. "Roy thinks by afternoon," he said. "Maybe sooner." She did the arithmetic without pausing. 16 rows left in the north field. At yesterday's pace, with 2 scythes working 16 rows, was 3 days of cutting. They had at the outside 6 hours of workable weather remaining. Possibly 4. 3 scythes in the north field, she said. "Move Clem off the west rows and put him with Roy and me. You and Harlan finish the south field. When the south is done, you come north." Cal looked at her. "Roy can still cut clean," she said. "I have watched him. He is slower than he used to be, but his rows are straight. Put him on the center rows. I take east, Clem takes west. 3 scythes instead of 2. It does not solve the mathematics entirely, but it improves them enough to matter." And Vane. "Coming at 9. Vane sees what he sees," she said. "What he sees at 9 determines what he reports. What he reports determines whether Holt calls the note. We cannot control Holt. We can control how many rows are cut when Vane walks this field. So let us cut rows." Cal turned toward the barn. "Roy," he called, and Roy was already in the doorway, hat on, as though he had been standing there waiting for someone to say the thing he already knew needed saying. "You heard her?" Cal said. "I heard her," Roy said, and walked toward the north field without another word. She was right behind him. The next 4 hours were the hardest of her time at Coldwater Ridge, and that was saying something. The wind worked against every swing, not violent yet, but relentless, pushing at the wheat from the south in long, irregular waves that complicated every angle. She had to read the gusts, find the rhythm, inside the disruption time herself to the brief lulls, and then move fast through them and maintain that for hours. Her right hand, wrapped and gloved, held the scythe the way it needed to be held. Not comfortably, adequately. She worked with the specific internal quiet of someone who has made a decision and is now simply executing it one swing at a time, one row at a time, without looking ahead to the number remaining or back at the number already done. Just the next swing. Just the current row. The wheat in front of her, and the blade in her hands, and the ground beneath her feet, solid, cold Kansas ground that did not care what she looked like or where she had come from, or what anyone in Caldwell had said about her on the steps of the dry goods store. The ground only cared what she could do. Clem worked the west rows with a focused silence she would not have predicted from him 9 days ago. She could hear his rhythm steady, reel the sound of a young man who had stopped performing and started working, and without meaning to, she matched it the way you match breathing with someone nearby. At 6:30, Roy appeared at the end of her row. "Vane's coming early," Roy said. "Saw a horse on the road." She straightened. "How far?" "Half mile." She looked at the rows behind her. 6 done since 4 o'clock. Clem had 6 on the west side. Roy had 4 in the center. 16 rows total, all of them cut. The field was not finished. 4 rows still standing, but 16 rows were down, and they were down clean, and the south field behind her was finished. She had heard Cal and Harlan come off it 30 minutes ago. She picked up her scythe and kept cutting. Arthur Vane came through the cut wheat toward her at 9:15. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, the careful, deliberate tread of a man unaccustomed to harvested grain fields, but trying to manage it with dignity. She finished her row before she turned. He stopped 8 feet from her. He looked at her, at the scythe, at the rows she had cut, at the rows still standing. "Miss Bauer," he said. "Mr. Vane." She was breathing hard and did not pretend otherwise. "Have you walked the south field?" "Mr. Brennan showed me," he said. "The south field is in good order." He looked at his notebook. He had been counting walking the perimeter, tallying cut rows, doing his own arithmetic. The notebook told her he was taking this seriously. The expression on his face told her he was taking it more seriously than his employer had intended. "North field count," she said. 16 rows cut, he said. At current density, the north field, if completed, would yield approximately 780 bushels. Combined with the south field total, projected yield would reach 1,420 bushels. 20 bushels over the required figure. She kept her face neutral. "If completed," she said. "Yes." He looked at the standing rows. "If completed." "Then your assessment should reflect projected completion," she said, "which is standard practice for harvest yield assessment. You assess trajectory, not snapshot. The harvest is on track to meet the note terms. The trajectory is clear. An honest assessment reflects that." Vane was quiet. He looked at her wrapped hand, at her sweat-soaked dress, at the rows she had cut since 4 in the morning in building wind with a storm visible on the southern horizon. "I will note the projected completion figure," he said, "and the weather conditions under which this assessment was conducted." "Thank you," she said. She picked up her scythe. "Is there anything else?" He looked at her for a moment, that complicated expression she had seen before, the one that lived between his professional composure and whatever he was actually thinking underneath it. "No," he said, "that is all." He walked back toward the yard. She turned to the next row and swung. The storm announced itself at 2 in the afternoon. Not with rain. With sound, a low continuous roar from the south, like something vast and fast and entirely indifferent to whatever stood in its path. The kind of sound that does not build gradually but arrives fully formed, as though it has been waiting just out of earshot and has finally stopped waiting. She heard it and knew what it meant before she felt the first hard gust hit her broadside and nearly wrenched the scythe from her hands. Off the field, Cal shouted from somewhere behind her. Now everyone off. She finished the swing she was already in the middle of. She heard Roy and Clem moving fast through the cut wheat. She straightened and looked at the standing rows. 4 left. She stood there for 1 full second, which was 1 second longer than she could afford. And then she put the scythe down and ran for the barn. The next 40 minutes were controlled chaos in the way that only people who know a property very well can manage everyone moving fast. Everyone knowing without discussion what needed saving first. She went straight to the grain storage. The sacks she had moved from the south wall 3 mornings ago were still on the interior shelving, and that decision was already paying its dividend. Water was sheeting under the barn door and moving across the lower floor, and the sacks were 3 inches above it and staying dry. She built a barrier anyway, rolled grain sacks end to end against the south wall base. Not enough to stop the water. She knew it was not enough, but enough to redirect it toward the drain channel instead of toward the stored grain. Harlan appeared beside her. "Barrier," she said, pointing. He understood immediately. He took the far end, she took the near end, and they worked fast. 3 sacks, 4, 5. The water hit the barrier and found the drain channel. She stood up. "The loft," she said. "Older stock up there, and the north end of the loft roof leaks. I noticed it the first week. I'll cover it," Harlan said, and went up the ladder. She went back out into the wind. It was a full-body effort to cross the yard, not the leaning you do against ordinary wind, but the whole weight commitment of someone pushing against something that is pushing back with serious intent. Rain had started hard and cold, each drop arriving with enough force to sting. She crossed to the main house. Owen. She had not thought about Owen since they came off the field, and that omission hit her now with something close to physical force. She pushed through the back door. Owen was in the kitchen, standing at the window watching the yard, with the rigid stillness of a child who is frightened past the point of knowing what to do with the fear. His face was white and set, his hands gripping the windowsill. She crossed the kitchen and put both hands on his shoulders. He turned. His face was working hard to hold itself together. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No," he swallowed. "The grain is the grain, Harlan, and I took care of it," she said. "The grain is fine. Are you hurt anywhere?" "No." His eyes went back to the window. "I was looking for—" He stopped. She looked at the window. She looked at the yard. She looked at the north field barely visible through the rain and wind. Cal was not in the yard. She found Roy at the barn door, leaning into the wind to hold it open. "Where is he?" she said. Roy's face did something she had not seen it do before. Not calm, but the controlled expression of a man managing something that is close to fear. "North field," he said. "He went back for the scythes. He won't leave equipment in the field." She looked at the north field. The wind was fully violent now. Somewhere in the moving chaos, she could see a shape bent almost double against the wind, carrying something. She went. Roy said something behind her. She did not hear what. She crossed the yard at a run, hit the field perimeter, and pushed into the wind and rain. The wheat around her was a roar she felt in her chest, more than heard with her ears, and the rain was hitting her face sideways, cold and insistent, and she could not see more than 15 feet in any direction. Cal. The wind took it completely. Cal. She pushed forward. She found him at the far edge of the north field, 30 feet from the fence line, crouched over the scythes he had gathered. 3 of them bundled under his arms. He had been moving toward the barn when the wind came up fully and hit him sideways, and he had gone down on one knee against the fence in the posture of a man deciding whether standing back up was going to be possible. She grabbed his arm. He looked up. He was soaking rain running in streams off his hat, and in the gray-green storm light his face was entirely unguarded. Surprised. Underneath the surprise was something she had been catching glimpses of for 9 days, something that did not have a tidy name. "I have the scythes," he said. Like that was the relevant information. "I can see that," she said. She did not let go of his arm. "Stand up." He stood. He was bigger than her by a considerable margin, and when the full weight of the wind hit them both, she braced and held, and the combined weight of them together was enough. She got her shoulder under his arm that was not carrying the scythes, and they moved together, leaning into each other, each one counterweight for the other against the lateral force of the wind. Graceless, slow, soaking. She did not think about anything except the next step and the next step and the barn door which Roy was holding open with his whole body. They got inside. Cal set the scythes against the interior wall. He straightened. He looked at her. Water ran off both of them onto the barn floor. The rain outside was fully arrived now, hammering the roof with a sound like 1,000 simultaneous things, and the wind in the eaves made the horses shift and stamp in their stalls. "You didn't have to come out there," he said. "You were down," she said. "You needed a counterweight." "A counterweight," he repeated. "Physics," she said. "Two people brace better than one in lateral wind. It is not complicated." He was looking at her with that expression, the one behind the stillness, the one that had been doing something it had not expected to be doing for 9 days, and that the storm had stripped closer to the surface than she had ever seen it. "Your hand," he said. She looked down. The cloth wrapping on her right palm had come loose in the field, soaked through the knot, slipped, exposing the blisters which were worse than this morning. She started rewrapping with one hand, which was not working. Cal stepped forward. He took her hand, both of his around her one, and he unwound the wet cloth and looked at the blisters and then reached past her to the supply shelf where the salve sat exactly where she had put it. He opened it. He applied it to her palm with the careful, precise attention of someone doing a thing correctly, because doing it incorrectly was not something he was willing to accept. She let him. She was not entirely sure why. She was not a person who generally let other people do things for her. She had learned that letting people do things for you created obligations, and obligations created dependencies, and dependency was the one thing she could least afford. She had learned to stand on her own side of every transaction and keep her accounts clear. But she let him. He rewrapped her hand with dry cloth. From the supply shelf tied it right and held her wrapped hand in both of his for a moment in the noise of the storm in the barn that smelled of wet grain and horses and the salt and work smell of 2 people who had been out in a harvest field since before dawn. "I have been watching you work for 9 days, he said. He looked at her hand. "I watched you fix the cartwheel with a rock on the road before you even got here. I watched you reorganize the grain without being asked. I watched you fix Harlan's boot and Clem's canteen and the cutting bar." He stopped. He started again. "You have never once asked me to make room for you. You simply made room." She looked at their hands, his holding hers. "Cal," she said carefully. He looked at her. "Don't say something you're going to reconsider when the storm is over." His eyes were direct and dark and entirely serious. "I have been reconsidering it for 9 days, he said. "I am done reconsidering." Outside, something cracked a fence post, giving way, she thought, or a branch from the cottonwood at the east edge of the yard. The rain was a wall of sound. And then, cutting through all of it, sharp and sudden and unmistakable, Owen screamed, not a fear sound. She knew the difference. This was pain, sharp and sudden, and it came from outside. She was through the barn door before she had made any conscious decision to move. Out into the rain and wind across the yard at a run toward the sound. What she found stopped her heart for 1 full second before her body took over. Owen was at the base of the cottonwood tree at the east side of the yard. A branch had come down, not on him directly, but close enough that he had gone down when it fell, and his left leg was caught under the smaller end of it. He was trying to pull himself free and could not. She got both hands under the branch. Her right hand told her exactly what it thought about that. She registered the information and set it aside and lifted. The branch was heavier than it looked, waterlogged and dense, and for a terrible half-second it did not move. Then Cal's hands were beside hers. They lifted together. The branch came up. Owen pulled himself free. Cal dropped the branch and went down on one knee beside the boy, hands moving over Owen's leg with efficient speed, checking damage the way a man checks damage when the person in front of him needs to see him be calm. "Tell me where it hurts." Cal said. His voice was completely level. "My ankle," Owen managed. "I think it's my ankle." Cal's hands moved to the ankle. He pressed carefully, watching Owen's face, stopping at the same point twice when Owen winced. "Not broken," Cal said. "Twisted, maybe sprained. Can you feel your foot?" "Yes." "Good." He put his arm around the boy and looked up at Marta. In that moment, Cal on one knee in the mud in the rain when In the curve of his arm, the storm fully arrived and roaring around everything. Something crossed Cal Brennan's face that she was not going to forget. Something that had no quick name. She filed it in a place she would be able to find it later. "I've got him," Cal said. "Get inside. Dry cloth and the salve. His ankle needs wrapping. Go." She went. She was back in 90 seconds, and Cal carried Owen through the back door and set him on the kitchen bench. And she wrapped the ankle with the steady efficiency of someone whose hands had stopped being personal objects several hours ago and had become simply tools doing what was needed. Owen watched her work. He had decided not to cry and was holding that decision with both hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "I heard something hit the cottonwood and I went to look." "I know," she said. She tied off the wrapping. "It's all right." "I didn't want the tree to fall," he said quietly. "My pa planted that tree." She looked up at him. His face was pale and tight and very young and very serious all at once. "The tree is still standing," she said. "Just the one branch." Owen let out a long breath. Some of the white went out of his face. He leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment, and in that moment he looked exactly like what he was, a 10-year-old boy who had been frightened past his capacity and had held it together anyway, alone in a kitchen during a storm, waiting for the people he depended on to come back. She put her hand briefly against the side of his face. One moment, just that. Then she turned to the stove to check the fire. Outside she could hear Cal in the yard, and then his boots on the porch, and then the back door. Roy appeared behind him. "Grain secure," Roy said. "South wall barrier held. Harlan's got the horses." Cal looked at Roy, then he looked at the window. The north field. "What's left is standing," Roy said quietly. "Won't know what the storm does to it until it passes." The kitchen went quiet except for the storm. Owen looked between the adults. "Is the ranch going to be all right?" he said. Cal looked at the boy. Then he looked at Marta. She held his eyes for one breath and made a decision, the specific decision she had been circling for 9 days, the one that was not hers to make, and that she was going to make anyway because not making it was going to cost more than she was willing to spend. "I have $31, she said, "in my room." The kitchen went still. Cal started Marta. 4 weeks of wages from a seamstress position in Wichita. "Before I came here," she said, "saved carefully." She looked at him steadily. "It is not enough by itself, but combined with what the harvest brings in, is it enough?" A long silence. The storm pressed at every window simultaneously. Cal said very quietly, "It's enough." She nodded. She turned to the stove. Behind her, the kitchen was still, and then she heard Cal's boots cross the floor and stop directly behind her. Not touching. Close enough that she could feel the cold coming off his wet clothes. "Why?" he said. "Just that one word." She kept her eyes on the stove. Her voice came out steady. She had no idea how. "Because this is a good ranch," she said, "and you are a decent man, and Owen's father planted that cottonwood." She picked up the fire iron, "and I am tired of watching good things get lost because people were too proud to let someone help them." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're not leaving after harvest." She turned. He was standing 2 feet from her, hat in his hand, hair dark from the rain, completely serious. His eyes doing something that had stopped being deniable several conversations ago and had become something she had been building her days around without meaning to. "That is not a question," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't." Outside, the storm reached its fullest voice, a sound that filled everything and pressed into every corner of the house and made the walls feel solid and real around all of them. Owen sat on the kitchen bench with his wrapped ankle and his careful eyes watching everything. "Supper," she said. "Yes," Cal said. He did not move. "Someone has to make it," she said. "Yes," he said again. Neither of them moved for 3 full seconds. Then Owen said with perfect seriousness, "I could make the cornbread." She showed me how. Something broke loose in the room. Something that had been held carefully for 9 days came undone all at once, and Cal Brennan laughed not loud, not long, but real. Completely, genuinely real. The laugh of a man who had forgotten he knew how and had just been reminded by a 10-year-old boy making a practical offer in the middle of a storm. Marta turned back to the stove. Outside, Owen was already sliding off the bench to get the flour. The storm left the way it had arrived, all at once, like a door pulled shut by someone in a hurry. She woke at 4:30 to silence and lay still for a moment, listening to the absence of the wind. After days of that constant pressure against the glass, the quiet felt almost loud. She was downstairs before 5. She built the fire back up and put the coffee on and stood at the window. The 4 rows she had not finished cutting, standing when the storm began, now flat bent to the ground in the long tangled mats that a hard storm leaves behind, stalks lying sideways and crossed and soaking. The kind of mess a clean scythe could not touch. She had run this arithmetic 100 times in the past 12 hours. She ran it again now, standing at the window with the coffee going behind her, and it came out the same wrong number it always did. She heard Cal's boots on the stairs. He came into the kitchen and stopped behind her, and she knew by the pause that he had followed her eye line to the field. They did not speak for a moment. "Vane's report," he said finally. "He recorded the projected completion figure," she said. "He told me so in the field. He said he would note the storm timeline as well. Holt doesn't have to honor a projection." "No," she said. "He doesn't." She had written her arithmetic on a piece of paper in the hour before she slept. She set it in front of him now. South Field projected yield. Northfield rows completed before the storm. Estimated bushels, her $31. The total if Vane's report held. How close, she said. He looked at the paper, then at her. 60 bushels, he said, maybe 70, depending on Vane's final count. She thought about 60 bushels. She thought about what 60 bushels meant in a bank ledger in the office of a man in an expensive coat. She thought about Arthur Vane and his notebook and the expression on his face when he said he would note the storm timeline. She thought about a man who hesitates, and dishonest men in her experience did not generally hesitate. "I need to go to Caldwell," she said. Cal looked at her. "Today," she said. "This morning. Before Holt has time to act on whatever Vane has told him." "Marta, I know the legal language for this," she said. "Force majeure. It exists in contract law for situations precisely like this one. A party cannot be held in default for failure caused by circumstances entirely outside their control. If Vane's report documents the storm as the cause of the shortfall, and if the harvest payment plus my money brings the total within a reasonable margin, there is an argument to be made to a judge that calling the full note would be an unjust enforcement." Cal stared at her. "You know contract law. I know the parts that have been relevant to my life," she said, "which includes the parts about acts of God, because I have had occasion to need them before." She looked at him steadily. "Vane is honest. I believe that. If I can speak to him before Holt shapes what that report says and does not say, then the report can reflect the truth of what happened here. And the truth is on your side." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then you need someone to go to Caldwell and make that case." "I'll go," he said immediately. "You need to stay here," she said. "The South Field needs final drying before Vane's count can be confirmed. Your crew needs direction. You cannot be in Caldwell and here at the same time." She held his eyes. "I can make this argument. I know the language for it. Let me go." He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the first grey light was coming up over the fields. The farm was settling back into itself after the violence of the night. "Take Harlan's mare," Cal said. "She's steadier on a wet road." Marta nodded. She started toward the door. "Marta." He said it quietly. She stopped. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and put his hand against the side of her face, the way she had put her hand against Owen's face the night before. And he held it there and looked at her with everything unguarded and present. "Come back," he said. 2 words. She felt them in every part of her chest. "I'll be back before noon," she said. She went to saddle the mare. Caldwell. In the early morning after a storm was a town reassembling itself. Shutters being opened, debris cleared from the road, the quiet industry of people taking stock of what the night had done to their things. She rode through it without stopping, without looking at the dry goods store where Mrs. Crail had stood on the steps 3 weeks ago. She had a destination, and she went directly to it. Arthur Vane was at his desk when she came through the door of the surveyor's office on 2nd Street. Lamplight through the window, his pen in his hand. He looked up, and his expression moved through several things before settling into something she read as a man who had been half expecting this and was deciding which version of himself to be. "Miss Bower," he said. "Mr. Vane, I would like to speak with you about your report before you submit it." He set down his pen. "That report is the property of the bank. Your professional integrity is the property of no one," she said. She sat down across his desk without being invited. "I am not asking you to change your findings. I am asking you to make certain your findings reflect the complete truth of what you observed." He folded his hands on the desk. "Go on," he said. She talked for 12 minutes. She was precise and calm, and did not editorialize beyond what the facts required. She laid out the harvest timeline, the storm trajectory, the documented fact that the North Field had been on pace to complete before the storm arrived earlier than any forecast had indicated. She laid out force majeure and its application to note enforcement in the context of a demonstrable act of God. And she laid out carefully and without direct accusation the timing of Holt's visit the afternoon before the storm. His awareness of the weather reports his decision to send a yield assessor the day before, a storm he knew was coming. Vane was very still by the time she finished. "You're saying Holt knew," he said. "I am saying the timeline speaks for itself," she said. "I am saying that a man in your position whose reputation rests on the accuracy and honesty of his assessments should be aware of how that timeline reads to a judge." "Any legal challenge would require a lawyer," Vane said. "Yes," she said. "Do you know of one?" A long pause. "The kind that contains a decision being made." "There is a man named Edmund Fitch Vane," said slowly. "He practices out of Wichita. He has taken cases against Holt before." He stopped as though he had said more than he intended. "Has he won?" she said. Vane looked at his desk. "Twice," he said. "Out of 3. She filed that away. "Your report, Mr. Vane." He picked up his pen. He looked at his notes from yesterday. He looked at her, the projected completion figure, he said, and the storm arrival time, and the documented trajectory of the North Field cutting as of 9 o'clock yesterday morning. "Yes," she said. "That is what I observed," he said. "That is what my report will reflect." She stood. "Thank you, Mr. Vane." He looked up at her. That complicated expression again, the one she had seen in the field when he looked at her wrapped hand, and her 12-cut rose behind her, and said, "That is all." "Miss Bower," he said, "Holt will be in this office by 10. He will want that report filed by noon." "I know," she said. "That is why I came at 7. She turned to go, then she stopped. "Mr. Vane, this ranch Cal Brennan has been there 15 years. Built it himself, starting with nothing." "I know that," Vane said quietly. She turned around fully. "Do you know why Holt wants it?" "Beyond the land itself." A long silence. Vane looked at his hands. "The water rights," he said. "East Creek runs through the northeast corner of the property. Brennan's water rights on that creek are worth considerably more to a man building the kind of operation Holt is building than the land and the note combined." He paused. The interest rate on that note was not set at random. "Miss Bower." She stood very still. She had suspected it. Hearing it confirmed was different from suspecting it. "How long have you known that?" Vane looked at his hands. "Long enough," he said, "that I am glad you came in this morning." She made a fast decision. "Can you write down Edmund Fitch's address in Wichita?" He wrote it. He handed the paper across the desk. She took it. "You are a decent man, Mr. Vane," she said. I hope your employer is aware of that." She went out into the morning. She rode back to Coldwater Ridge at a pace that Harlan's mare found objectionable and communicated clearly through her ears the entire way. She arrived to find horses at the fence she did not recognize and voices in the yard she had not expected to hear until afternoon. Holt was already there. 3 horses at the gate. Holt in his good coat. 2 other men with him, one holding papers with the posture of legal representation written into every line of him. Cal stood in the yard with Roy at his shoulder, and she could read Cal's jaw from 30 feet away. She rode through the gate and dismounted and walked into the middle of it without breaking stride. Holt looked at her. "Miss Bauer, you've been to town?" "I have," she said. She looked at the papers in the stranger's hand. "What is that?" "A preliminary notice of default," Holt said. "In light of the storm damage to the harvest, the bank has concluded that the note terms cannot be met. This notice begins the 30-day period before foreclosure proceedings." She looked at the papers. She looked at the man holding them. "Are you a legal representative of the bank?" He blinked. "I'm the bank's yes or no." "Yes." "Then you are aware," she said, "that a preliminary notice of default issued before the assessor's report is finalized is procedurally invalid. The note terms specify that any default action must be preceded by a completed assessment. Mr. Vane's assessment is not complete." She held the man's eyes. "Which means that document is not valid." "Not today." The legal man looked at Holt. Holt looked at Marta. She stood in the wet yard in a mud-splashed dress with her right hand wrapped in cloth, and she looked back at him with the particular steadiness she had learned to hold when a man was discovering that the conversation was not going the way he had planned for it to go. "The assessment will be complete by this afternoon," Holt said. "Then come back this afternoon," she said, "with a valid document." A silence. Holt looked at Cal. Cal said nothing. He stood with his arms at his sides and his weight balanced and his face entirely still. And the effect of it was that Holt found himself speaking to Marta, because speaking to Cal felt like speaking to a wall. Holt picked up his hat. "Ms. Bauer, I would encourage you not to mistake a procedural delay for a change in outcome. And I would encourage you," she said, "to make sure your afternoon visit includes full documentation of the storm timeline and its effect on harvest completion. Because if that documentation is absent, and if we find ourselves before a judge, the question of why it was absent will be one the judge is likely to find very interesting. Particularly given the timing of your request for an independent assessment the afternoon before a storm that the weather reports had been tracking for days." Holt went very still. She looked back at him steadily. He left. The 3 horses went out through the gate and the yard went quiet. Roy let out a breath that sounded like it had been building since before she arrived. Owen appeared in the kitchen doorway, in his clean shirt, leaning slightly on the frame, and his face when he saw her went from white to something enormous with relief. Cal turned to look at her. He looked at her for a long time. "Force majeure," he said, "and a procedural defect. And a lawyer named Edmund Fitch in Wichita who has beaten Holt twice," she said. "And the water rights on East Creek, which are why Holt wanted this property in the first place, and why this note was structured to fail from the beginning." Cal went very still. "The water rights. That creek is worth more to him than the land," she said. "Vane told me this morning. The original financing, the interest rate, the terms." She stopped herself from running ahead of the evidence. "We need Fitch. We need to get the original note in front of a lawyer who knows what to look for." The ruling was final, she would learn later. Holt's lawyers filed no appeal. There was nothing left to appeal. Cal looked at her for one more moment. Then he turned and went into the house to get the original note from his lockbox. Roy came to stand beside her. "When Brennan put that telegram up in Caldwell," Roy said without preamble, "I told him he was going to get somebody useless or somebody desperate." She looked at him. "I was wrong about the useless part," Roy said. He picked up his hat, resettled it, and walked back toward the barn. She stood in the yard in the morning after the storm and let that land. Edmund Fitch came from Wichita 4 days later. Small man, sharp eyes, ink-stained fingers, the manner of someone who found the law genuinely interesting rather than merely useful, the mark of a lawyer worth having. He sat at the kitchen table with the original note and Vane's completed report, which had reflected exactly what Vane had said it would, and he read both with the complete absorption of a man who already suspects what he is going to find. He looked up after 20 minutes. "The interest rate," he said. "It is usurious by Kansas statute." Not dramatically, Holt is careful but over the legal threshold by 0.75%. The kitchen went quiet. That alone does not void the note, Fitch said. But it opens the door. Combined with the force majeure argument on the harvest shortfall and combined with, he set his hand on Vane's report, this documentation of the storm timeline and the trajectory of the harvest. He sat back. Holt sent Vane out the day before a storm he knew was coming. A judge is going to want to know why. "Can you make that argument?" Cal said. Fitch looked at Marta. "You talked to Vane." "Yes." "You identified the procedural defect in the default notice." "Yes." "You know contract law." "The relevant parts," she said. He looked at her with the frank interest of a man revising something significant. "Where did you study?" "I didn't," she said. "I read. I have had reasons to read." Fitch looked at Cal. "She should be in the room when we meet with the judge," he said. "She knows this case better than I do, and I have been practicing law for 18 years. Cal looked at her. She looked at Cal. "I will be in the room," she said. The hearing was in Wichita 2 weeks later, before a judge named Aldrich, who had a reputation for fairness and a well-documented impatience with people who wasted his time. Holt arrived with 2 lawyers. Marta arrived with Fitch and Cal, and 11 days of work, a document she had prepared at the kitchen table every evening after supper, a timeline of the note terms and the harvest trajectory and the storm and the default notice laid out in clean parallel columns, with citations to Kansas statute at the relevant points. Owen had sat beside her every evening during those 11 nights, reading beside her, pushing the ink jar closer without being asked when she ran low. Fitch read it the morning of the hearing. "This is better than what I wrote," he said without inflection. "It is the same argument," she said, "just organized differently." "Yes," he said. "That is what I mean." In the hearing room, Holt's lawyers were smooth and well prepared for a standard force majeure argument. They were not prepared for the usurious interest rate which they had not known to look for. They were not prepared for the storm timeline laid against the date of Vane's visit, which they tried to dismiss as coincidence and which Judge Aldrich did not dismiss. And at one point, Marta answered a direct question from Aldrich about the note terms, and one of Holt's lawyers objected on the grounds that she was not a licensed attorney. Aldrich looked at him over his glasses. "She is not required to hold a license to answer a question of fact, Counselor," he said. "Sit down." Holt looked at her across the hearing room. She looked back. She thought about Mrs. Crail on the steps of the dry goods store. She thought about Walt Denny on the wagon who did not stop. She thought about every room she had ever been in, where the conversation became about someone else's discomfort with her existence. She held Holt's eyes and did not look away. Aldrich ruled that afternoon. The interest rate was found to be in violation of Kansas statute, and the note was to be redrawn at the legal maximum. The harvest shortfall was ruled a qualifying force majeure event. The default notice was voided on procedural grounds. Holt was ordered to accept the harvest payment and Marta's $31, which she had brought in an envelope and placed on the table with the quiet finality of someone who had been holding it for exactly this moment as full satisfaction of the adjusted note terms. The water rights on East Creek remained with Coldwater Ridge Ranch. In the hallway afterward, Holt stopped beside her. He looked at her for a long moment, not warm, not hostile, just that cold, calculating look that was the closest he came to genuine expression. He was trying to find the category for her. What kind of woman did this? What kind of woman walked 4 miles on a bad cartwheel in August, heat-fixed equipment, cut wheat by lantern light, rode to town at 7 in the morning, read case law by lamplight, and looked a judge in the eye as though he were simply a man with a question she happened to know the answer to. He did not find the category. She did not help him find it. He walked away. Fitch shook her hand. "If you are ever interested," he said, "I have an opening for a legal researcher. Wichita is a considerably larger town than Caldwell." She looked at Cal, who was standing 6 feet away with his hat in his hand. Watching her with that complete unguarded attention she had been cataloguing for 3 weeks and was still not entirely sure she knew how to hold steadily. "I already have a position," she said. They drove back to Coldwater Ridge in the wagon together, just the two of them, the Kansas road wide and flat, and the afternoon light long and gold across the fields on either side. The harvest was finished across the county. Now cut fields everywhere gathered grain, the particular satisfied stillness of land that has been properly worked and is resting. She sat beside him on the wagon bench, and they were quiet for a long time. "My wife Cal said finally. She died of a fever 4 winters ago." She waited. "I grieved her right," he said. "Then I kept going because that is what you do." He was quiet for a moment. "She would have liked you. She had no patience for people who wasted their own ability." Marta looked at the road ahead. "I stopped thinking past the next season," Cal said. "Just the next harvest, the next note payment, the next thing in front of me." He paused. "Since you walked into that yard, I have been thinking further than that. I have been thinking about what this place looks like in 5 years and 10. I have been thinking about Owen finishing his schooling and what that requires." He stopped. "I have been thinking about things I stopped letting myself think about." She did not answer immediately. She let the wagon move. She let the road run on. Then she said, "Owen needs someone to teach him to cook properly. He has the instincts, but he needs the technique. Your fence on the north property line needs to be restrung before winter, or you will lose cattle every time the temperature drops." She looked at him. "And someone needs to read through the terms of the new note before you sign it. Fitch is good, but 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Cal held her gaze. "Is that a yes?" he said. She looked at the road ahead. At Coldwater Ridge coming into view around the bend, the fence line and the open gate in the yard, where she had stood on the first day with a suitcase tied with rope and a heart she was keeping closed with both hands. The gate was open. It had been open every time she came home. "Yes," she said. "That is a yes." He reached across the wagon bench and took her hand. Her right hand, the one with the old calluses and the new-healed blisters, the one that had straightened an axle pin with a rock and stitched a boot sole and guided a cutting bar back into alignment and held a scythe through 12 rows of lantern-lit wheat and braced against a storm wind to bring a man back to his own barn. He held it the way he had held it in the barn during the storm, with the same careful, particular attention he gave to things that mattered. She let him. Owen came off the porch at a run. Boots on the wrong feet as usual, face wide open with the specific joy of a child who has learned that the people he needs are going to stay. He was asking about supper before he reached the wagon, asking whether she had brought anything from Wichita, asking whether the judge had been tall, and Cal caught him by the collar before he could slam into the mare and swung him up onto the bench between them without releasing Marta's hand. Owen looked down. He saw their joined hands. He looked at Cal. He looked at Marta. He sat with that for a moment, giving it the same serious consideration he gave to everything that seemed important. Then he nodded the deliberate, decisive nod he had given her on the back step the very first week, the one that meant he was storing something in a place he would always be able to find it. Then he said, "Can we have cornbread tonight? I want to make it myself." "Yes," Marta said. "I will supervise." "You always supervise," he said. "Someone has to," she said. Cal said nothing. He was smiling, not wide, not the kind of smile that announced itself to the room, but real, all the way through the smile of a man who had stopped bracing for the next hard thing and was, for the first time in a long time, simply present in the moment he was actually in. Roy Kessler appeared in the barn doorway, looked at the 3 of them on the wagon bench, and went back inside without a word. Harlan Pruitt came out of the bunkhouse, saw them, lifted his hat once in a gesture that required no translation, and returned to what he had been doing. Clem was nowhere to be seen. He was learning slowly, and not without difficulty, that some moments did not require a witness or a comment. Marta stepped down from the wagon. She walked toward the kitchen door, the same door she had come through 22 days ago with a suitcase tied with rope, looking at a kitchen that needed someone to run it, at a ranch that needed someone to see it clearly, at a man who needed someone to stay. She put her hand on the door. She was the same woman. Same body, same past, same accent that thickened when she was tired. Same hands with their old calluses and their new healed blisters. The same person who had walked 4 miles in August heat because there was nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose, who had straightened an axle pin with a rock on the Caldwell Road because the wheel was pulling and she needed to keep moving. The difference was that now she knew what she had been moving toward. She opened the door and went inside, and the kitchen was warm, and Owen was already underfoot, asking about the cornbread ratio and whether more butter made it better. And outside she could hear Cal putting up the mare with the easy, unhurried movements of a man who knew his work would be there tomorrow, and so would his home, and so would the people in it. Marta Bauer put on her apron. She built up the fire. She was home.